Hey everybody! So this is day 3 of my movie recommendations for the month of October of 2025. And today's movie is going to be a doozy. And this video is probably going to be filmed in like 2 different locations because this is going to be a lengthy review. And I'm going to split it up into 2 different parts. The first half of this review is just going to be like my other reviews. It's going to be me rating the movie, giving you the basic information about the movie, kind of recommending it, giving you just the lowdown on like just the basics, right? And then the second half of this review is going to be for people who are okay with spoilers, and it's going to be for people who may leave the review, watch the movie, and then decide to come back to hear more in-depth, insightful opinions from me, because this movie there's a lot to it, and I've seen it twice now. I saw it once a year ago, and then now this is my second time viewing it today. I watched it a second time to refresh my brain so that I could give you a really detailed thought and analysis of the movie. And now that I've watched it a second time, I have a lot to say about it. I really like this director. She does a wonderful job, and so I really wanted to share a lot of my thoughts and opinions on this movie, but in order to share those, I have to spoil some things. So when I get to that part in this video, I'll just say, stop, don't progress further if you haven't seen it, go watch the movie and then come back later. And then you'll know to stop this video and not progress any further. So today's movie is actually the movie Revenge. And I've got a notebook full of notes here. I took notes this time. I'm super prepared. I'm telling you. Y'all watch out. Things are getting real up in here. So Revenge is currently sitting at 92% on the tomato meter and 61% on the popcorn meter on Rotten Tomatoes. It has a 6.4 out of 10 on IMDb. You can watch it for free on Tubi, Filio, which I've never watched anything on that before, Plex. Again, never watched anything on that. AMC Plus, I don't have AMC Plus, or Shudder, which is what I watched this on. I am not sponsored by any of those, but I highly recommend Shudder. It's a great platform if you love horror movies or horror TV shows. So this movie, again, is called Revenge. It was directed by Coralie Fargeat. She's French. She's a French director, female director. So I'm probably mispronouncing your name, and if I am, I'm sorry, but I adore your work. You're a phenomenal writer and director. She also wrote and directed The Substance. So if you saw the movie The Substance that came out, I think last year, with Demi Moore, then that is also her work. And if you liked that movie, then chances are you'll probably love this one as well. She is the queen, in my opinion, at body horror movies or revenge movies, which this movie is so aptly titled. This movie would be classified as like an action, horror, thriller, drama, body horror. Definitely body horror. Do not watch this movie if you're squeamish. Absolutely not. If you're somebody that cannot handle a little bit of blood, do not watch this movie. This is not for you. So the cast is Matilda Lutz, who plays Jen in this movie. She's the main character. There's Kevin Janssens. Again, I'm sorry if I mispronounce any of your names. He is Richard, who is Jen's, let's say, love interest. Vincent Colombe, which is a character named Stan. We'll call him Jen's abuser. And then there's Dimitri, who is another side character that's friends with Richard and Stan. And I don't remember how to pronounce that actor's name, so I'm sorry to that actor, but he does not play a large role in this movie, so I just figured I would share that character's name. This movie is rated R, so some heads up as far as trigger warnings. I'm going to go ahead and lay them out there, and I'm going to be super blunt about all the trigger warnings. So everything that I spell out for you is in this movie, which means if any of these bother you, do not watch this movie because they are in it, and it is very raw, real, and in your face. This director does a great job not hiding anything from people. Because she has a message to convey and she wants to say it. very bluntly. And if you saw The Substance, she did the same thing with that movie as well. So you'll know. If you saw The Substance, you'll know. This one's a little bit more graphic than The Substance, I will say that, but in a lot of different ways than The Substance. Okay, so trigger warnings. There's female and male nudity, so if that bothers you, it's in this movie. There's, of course, cursing. Shocker. It is a horror movie. There is drugging, so both voluntary and involuntary. So the main character, she does take a drug willingly in this movie, and then she is also drugged possibly at one point in this movie. There's also drinking and other things going on in this movie. If those things bother you, probably not the movie for you. This movie centers around revenge. So if you find that to be ethically atrocious and you just cannot bear to see it, then do not watch this movie. There is a dead animal thrown on a car windshield at one point. This is a hunting trip. I'll go more into the storyline in just a minute. It's not too incredibly graphic, but it is gross. So if that would bother you, maybe don't watch it. I know some people are really weird about animal death, and rightfully so. Animals are awesome. But if that would bother you, then avoid this movie. There is now some of the heavier topics. There is lots of blood and gore. This movie is a body horror. So there is excessive, and when I say excessive, I mean excessive blood and gore in this movie. The final scene is extremely bloody. The gore is pretty gruesome. There is particularly scenes with a foot, and eyeballs and ears, sensitive areas on people's bodies that are particularly gross, that you have up close shots of, very graphic, things being pulled out of different parts of people's bodies. If that's going to bother you, this is not going to be the movie for you. There is consensual and unconsensual sex in this movie. So when I say unconsensual sex, I do mean rape. That is what I mean by Jen's abuser is Stan. Stan does rape Jen in this movie. It is not a long scene, but it is a distressing scene. And you don't really see much. You just hear it. But it is still horrific. There is also male on female physical abuse. So you will see a man slap a woman, and you will see a man attempt to strangle a woman in this movie. So if that is something that bothers you, again, this is a horror movie. There are horrific things that happen in this movie. So now let's talk about the plot line real quick. If none of those things are going to stop you from watching a horror movie, because that is what you are wanting to watch, is something horrific to scare you, increase your blood pressure, make you scared, and elicit shocking feelings from you so that maybe you can leave the movie with some kind of insightful knowledge about yourself. If that is what you're hoping to gain from this movie, you will gain something from this movie. This movie does have an intense storyline behind it. There is some depth to this movie, which I get into with my spoiler review. But the overall storyline for this movie, without any spoilers, is it is about three wealthy middle-aged CEOs. They're all very wealthy men, all married. They get together for an annual hunting game trip in a desert canyon. It's a way for them to let off steam and affirm their manhood with guns, right? There's a lot of manly imagery, a lot of wrestling imagery, a lot of racing imagery. There's a lot of stuff in this movie that's about being a man. If you watch The Substance, you would see she does a lot of stuff with like up close shots of men, up close shots of women, a lot of stuff with like masculine, feminine energy. But this time, one of the men decides to bring his young mistress. Now, Jen is the mistress in this story, and Richard is the man that brings her along. And I say mistress because Richard is married and Jen is his mistress. They are not married. They are together, but they are not married. But this one time, one of them brings her along, and it catches the interest of the two friends, and things get out of hand, as we have discussed in the trigger warnings. And she is left for dead in the middle of this desert. I'll leave it at that. because she does not die, she is alive. This then turns things on its head, and the hunting game turns into a ruthless manhunt. And that is why this movie is called Revenge. Now I'm going to pause the video and start in another location of filming. Hi again. So it is much later now, change of scenery. However, post-workout at the gym, you are getting the remainder of my review. So the last 2 days I've been reviewing or giving a personal score of these movies. And I do want to go ahead and give my personal score for this movie prior to giving my spoiler review later in the video. My personal score for this movie would probably be a 7 or an 8. I would rank it very high. The first time I watched this movie, I would have leaned more towards the 7, but now upon seeing it a second time, I would lean more towards the 8 because there are things that I noticed, specific things that I noticed that I thought were kind of, like little cheeky touches to the movie that I didn't notice the first time I watched it that I really enjoyed. And I will get into those things in my spoiler portion of this video. But before I get to that, I do want to discuss some overarching themes in this movie without spoiling anything. This director, she does a really good job of going into the dynamics of men and women and their relationships with one another. She did this in her movie The Substance, where she does these really intense close-up shots of men like licking their lips or people eating food and the really gross sounds that they make when they eat, or like a woman's body, and she'll film really close up on like her curves or her buttocks or like parts of her body that she's trying to get a point across of, like, I guess like where the male gaze would be if a man were to be looking at this particular woman. And she does the same thing that she does in The Substance in this movie as well. This movie actually came before The Substance. It came out before The Substance. So you see a lot of her influence from this movie in the movie The Substance. Now, there are some themes of toxic masculinity and ways that it hurts women in this movie, but not even just that. There is, I would say, also highlights of ways that it hurts men as well in this movie, because you see these interesting dynamics between the friends, the male friends in this movie, particularly with Richard, who is the partner in the very beginning to Jen, and Stan, who is the abuser of Jen. You see their personalities are very different, and it's not in a way that you would suspect. You would suspect Stan to be the more aggressive person, being that he is Jen's abuser. However, you see in the progression of the movie that Stan is much more remorseful and sympathetic than Richard. And so watching that dynamic between those two characters and the way they react to this cat and mouse revenge thing play out is really interesting, because it shows you different ways that men handle this whole toxic masculinity, this anger, and you've got to be a man, you got to suppress your feelings of fear, you got to be tough, you got to handle it. And it's interesting how they even become victims. Stan in many ways becomes a victim of Richard because of that dynamic, because of those traits that men expect from other men. So that was something that was kind of an interesting and pleasant commentary from this movie that people might not initially get, but was very nice. And I can include in my spoiler-free portion of my review of this movie, because I think it's something of substance, ironically, that would be beneficial for people to hear. I will say there are some really graphic scenes in this movie. This movie, I have a pretty tough stomach when it comes to gore, but this movie has some pretty rough parts. There's a part in particular, like I mentioned earlier, when I was giving my trigger warnings and saying that there were some sensitive areas on the body that are targeted. There's one with a foot that is particularly gruesome. So just be aware if you're somebody that is very squeamish. This director is, like I said, the queen of body horror. She does such a good job, and the practical effects in this movie are really well done. That was something I enjoyed about her movie, The Substance, as well, is her practical effects. You're not getting fake CGI, AI imagery. You're getting true artistry of, props and makeup and things that went into making this look as realistic as possible. Now, I will say, since we are comparing her two works together, if you saw The Substance, that would be more of a body horror turn monster movie, kind of, right? But if you expect that from this movie, you're not going to get that. This movie is very realistic gore. It's very much, man hunting man gore. There's blood, there's, shootings and stabbings and ugh. So if that's, something that if you usually do better with like sci-fi type stuff, but not too realistic stuff, just a heads up for that as well. This director does a really good job showing more animalistic sides to people and people's urge to right wrongs. And I really enjoy that about her. She kind of gives you space to play as you're watching her movies where, if what are movies if not artistic forms of expression for like lives that you can never live, right? And so as you're watching Jen throughout this movie, you are watching her progression from one person to another person. And you will see in this movie, the very beginning of the movie, she's this, you can kind of see her back here, this bright, vibrant, little, because she's very small, blonde, ambitious girl, right? She's reeks of sexuality and beauty and youth, and everything that, men look for in a partner and a woman usually. Well, at least what the media portrays, what men look for. Now, by the end of the movie, she looks nothing like this. By the end of the movie, she has completely transformed. Her character has gone through what I would call a phoenix transformation, and that will make more sense once you watch the movie. But her hair by the end of the movie is all matted, dark, brownish black from the copious amounts of blood that she spills and other people around her spill around her. Her clothes are completely different, although she is not as covered as one would think. And I'll dive more into that in just a moment. But she still beautiful as ever, but by the end of the movie, a completely different woman, a changed woman. She goes from being this plaything and this prey figure to being a huntress, a predator. And there is a lot of imagery of that. There's a lot of blood trails in this movie. It's funny that these boys are going on a hunting trip. Usually when you shoot your prey on a hunting trip, you have to track it using blood trails. And there are a lot of those in this movie of somebody tracking blood. And that's fitting that, on a hunting trip, they would be tracking blood trails. It's just unfortunate that it happens to be human blood trails and not animal ones that they were, hoping to be hunting. There's also a lot of interesting dynamics between the characters and their different personalities that I really enjoyed. This particular character, Jen, when she is finally mustered up the courage to get her revenge, she is not quite as strong-willed and brave as this character, which is Richard. So anytime you see different characters kind of muster up this courage to do something and hurt another character or attack another character or whatever that may be or look like, you see kind of their thought process and their emotions kind of bubble up, right? And when Richard is acting out, is expressing violence or whatever, he is very almost calm, calculative. He is kind of like just very like full of anger, just angry man. When Jen is, acting out violence, a lot of it, you feel her fear and her anxiety. There's a particular scene where she is about to shoot a gun and you hear her heartbeat. Her heart's beating super fast. So she's not some transformed, even though her physical imagery is transforming throughout the film. She's not just some meditated Rambo all of a sudden that just, sometimes in these cliche horror movies, you see these women and all of a sudden they've gone through some kind of abuse and now they're some tough, crazy woman, No, that's not how this is. It's very realistic. She literally goes through this transformation where she is still fearful, but knows that in this situation it is hunt or be hunted. So she is tough and she does become somewhat of a predator, but she is still, you still see her anxiety and her nerves as she is being the hunter. And then same with Stan. He's kind of got similar emotions as Jen. And I thought the comparison of Stan and Jen versus the way Richard behaves whenever they're being violent, or each individual character is being violent, is very interesting because it shows that some people are capable of empathy a little bit differently than others, or remorse more so than others. And so even though Stan was the perpetrator of Jen's violence in the beginning of the movie, it shows that he still has this side of empathy, or, fear and emotions, where Richard is much more, like I said, angry and spiteful and like calm when acting out his anger. So it makes you wonder, or even think like maybe, not all killers are the same, but also not all monsters are the same, because Stan was just as much of a monster to Jen as Richard, but just in different ways, right? Which I thought was very interesting. Let's see. Sorry, I'm referencing my notes as we go through. So, I think that's the majority of things that I can give you without spoiling too much of the movie. So if you have watched this portion of my review, I would say now's probably a good time to stop and go watch the movie if you choose to do so. If this is not the movie for you, I will say it's much more graphic than the other two that I've recommended. It's much more violent than the other two I recommended, and it is much more of a traditional horror movie than my other two October 2025 movies that I've recommended so far. But if you're looking for a true horror, what it really means to be afraid, I will say this movie does a good job of making real life situations seem extremely terrifying. This shows like the dynamics of men and women and true fear and true just it's just a scary situation. It's scary and it feeds off of raw human emotion. So if you're looking for a really scary horror movie, I would highly recommend this one. But it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. So I've given you plenty of time to click off. I'm giving you one last chance to ditch before I move on to my spoilers. All right, so now I'm moving into spoilers. Okay, so there are some things I want to talk about explicitly in terms of the storyline. And I wanted to dive in with the very beginning of the film. There's a lot of stylized imagery, which I really enjoy. I love the colors. I love, this shot in the very beginning where it's like you're zooming out of his aviators and then you've got her in the background looking all cute with her little sucker and her big earrings and her matching outfit. It's very like, I don't know, it gives like all pop art and bright and I don't know, there's something cool about it. So the stylized imagery was wonderful in this movie. There's a lot of masculine imagery as well. The TV tends to show a lot of shots of wrestling and racing and things like that. Lots of men grabbing, tackling men and stuff. I think that's intentional, obviously, to really amp up the like, ooh, tough guys, mindset in the very beginning of the film. Then there's also a lot of shots of females' bodies close up, but especially Jen, the main character. There's a lot of focus on her body, but her lips, her butt, they zoom in on a lot of intimate parts of her. She says to one of the characters in the film at one point that she really wants to be noticed. She wants to go to LA because she really wants to be noticed. And another guy even makes the comment, I think it was Stan, that you'd have to be blind to not to notice her. So they're really playing up this whole idea of beauty is, it's not from within. It's totally just a physical thing. And there is some truth to beauty being a physical thing, but there's also some truth to it being an attraction thing, right? It being something that is a personal push and pull between two people. And so they're partying together, these three friends and Jen, and they're listening to music, they're drinking, and all of a sudden the topic of this drug comes up, and the drug looks like bugs, which is, gross, ew, but I guess people do all sorts of weird stuff in the world, but they call it Fury, and they tell a story of a Polish guy that sawed his leg off without feeling anything, and I thought that was very, kind of handy way of saying, hey, when this comes in play later in the film, this is why she's like doing all this stuff and like kind of powering through it because, she's not really feeling a lot of stuff. So nice touch there. But the very beginning of the movie really focuses on the male gaze. There's a lot of zooming in to her body and just like what men find interesting. The movie, the way it is shot is very much highlighting what men like and nothing to do with women whatsoever, which is very intentional. Blonde, short skirt, skimpy outfit, sexy dancing, yada, yada, yada. These are just a part of my notes, but you get the picture. Very much highlighting what men like. Stereotypically, right? Stereotypically. Now, the next morning, things are a little different. And there is little touches of things that are kind of showing you things are changing. So in the beginning, the first day, she bites into this apple, but doesn't get to finish it and leaves it sitting. And by the next day, the apple is all nasty and rotted. And that's almost like a precursor to what's going to happen after she's been partying all night with these guys. There's unwanted touching. She's not very interested in Stan, but, you know, he is very much interested in Jen. He assumed that because they danced together the night before that, you know, that meant something to her. But in reality, she's just, you know, she was just casually dancing with him. I think it was more of a dancing with him to, you know, appease her actual boyfriend than any interest in Stan. So she tells Stan she's not interested, and he basically says this like underhanded comment about, oh, so now you're a politician, because she says that, you know, she's busy with work or something and she can't get together with him or call him. And he, you know, says this underhanded comment like, you know, you're not a politician, basically insinuating that she's just some floozy and not, you know, any well-to-do person. He persists, even though she's trying to be polite and tell him, you know, I'm just too busy, and, you know, shrug it off. He persists. He demands for her to tell him why he is not her type. And instead of saying it gently, at this point, she just flat out says, you're too small. You're too small. I like taller guys. And he does not take it well, obviously. He gets very upset, and he even calls her name. He calls her oyster brain, belittles her, devalues her immediately just because his feelings are hurt and he was rejected. So this is a very pivotal scene in the very beginning of the movie, because this is what leads to the spiral of the trauma and everything that happens the rest of the movie. So, he says things like, yesterday you were dying for it, like putting the blame on her, saying, you know, just because you were dancing with me, you were begging for me, basically. Which insinuates that girls can't revoke consent. It basically he's basically saying that just because she was dancing with him yesterday means that she automatically has to want him today. It implies that girls can't say later, oh, I don't want you anymore. Which is a very disgusting stereotype that a lot of, or I guess a disgusting misconception that some men have. Then their friend Dimitri walks in, and he sees that this situation is getting very uncomfortable between Stan and Jen, and Stan's getting very handsy with Jen. And instead of intervening, he walks out. Like, he doesn't help. He, you know, Stan basically tells him to get lost, and he leaves. And it's pretty gross. It shows a close-up shot of him eating, which is pretty typical for this director, and it's gross. She even bangs on this glass window for help. It's pretty traumatizing. And the whole scene it's sad because she's being blamed because she's revoking her consent of dancing with Stan. She's being called an oyster brain. She's being called basically a floozy and not some politician, like she's dumb just because she's with this guy. She, you know, is basically being manhandled by Stan because she's just too pretty to not touch. And, it's just a really gross situation. But after this all happens, her boyfriend, we'll call him, returns. And the other two friends are on the couch. Stan and Dimitri are on the couch. Richard returns. And they, instead of saying, we've got a problem or this happened, they very intentionally say there might be a slight problem with Jen. So I think this choice in dialogue is intentional by this director, because instead of saying, there was an issue or I made a mistake or anything like that, instead of him owning up to what he did, he blames it on the woman. She was tempting me. She's an oyster brain. There might be a problem with Jen. She's the problem, not me. No accountability. So what does Richard do to fix the problem? Well, Richard's a wealthy CEO, so he does what normal wealthy CEOs with mistresses normally do. He found her a job in Canada, which is nowhere near Los Angeles, but he tells her it's practically in Los Angeles, and he transferred money into her account. When she's not happy with that and tells him she wants the helicopter because she wants to go home, because she's been traumatized, and I'm assuming, trusted Richard, he tells her to not act like a child, again, belittling her, blaming her. He tells her, if you love me, think about me. Blaming her emotions on her and guilting her into thinking about poor him. And then he tells her, you messed up big time. You're so darn beautiful. It's hard to resist you. Now, I edited some of those words, but he blames her for being beautiful and says that that's why this happened to her. The man that earlier in the movie was laying in bed with her and told her that if it wasn't for his kids, things would be different. So I'm assuming that that statement by him was meant to elicit some kind of a thought or a feeling from her, thinking, oh, well, he might actually love me, because if it wasn't for his kids, he wouldn't be with his wife. But now, funny how the story changes once his friend that he works with did something to her, and he needs this problem to go away, and she doesn't want to take his money. She's acting like a child. She doesn't love him. And it's all her fault because she's too beautiful to resist. That's interesting. So these are some of the things I wanted to talk about in my spoiler review, because I thought that this was a really interesting topic to talk about in 2025. Jen gets upset, obviously, through all of this, through all of these statements, all of the trauma that she's been through. She threatens to call his wife because she knows that he's got a wife. Not saying she's a saint. Clearly, it's not a good idea to sleep with a married man. But he basically slaps her, I think, or threatens her. I can't even remember how that plays out. But she runs out the house, and they chase her. And as they chase her to a cliff. And Richard then turns into the monster that Richard is and apologizes and begs for her phone so he can call the helicopter. And when he gets her phone, he pretends like he's calling the helicopter, but doesn't really, and pushes her off the cliff. And she lands on a tree, I guess, like a stake. And they think, oh, she's dead, and they leave her. They leave her for dead. Later, they're burning her things, and Stan, I think it was Stan, asked Richard about Jen. Some kind of question, I don't remember what he asked, and Richard then says, never heard of her. So that shows that it's more than just the kids that's keeping Richard married and not with Jen, because clearly he's never heard of her. So, moving on. This film is riddled with disgusting behavior from men. So if you are easily triggered by really disgusting behavior from dudes, this film is going to make you feel some kind of way about it. If you are a man who doesn't like negative commentary on negative male traits, you probably want to skip this one, because this one's going to show some of the worst sides of certain populations of men. We'll leave it at that. Because not all men are like this. That would not be a fair assessment of all men. However, there are certain things I want to highlight in this film that I did not really take note of the first time I watched it, but I want to take note of this time. There's just a scene where Stan is peeing outside, and he's just for no reason peeing on a spider. For no reason, just other than being a jerk. He has no respect for living things. I guess that's what that also highlights in that scene. There's no guilt or remorse from Richard, but there is some from Stan later in the movie. Richard, on the other hand, is very stubborn, very aggressive, he digs his heels in and is like, no, she's got to go. And Stan later kind of feels remorse and doesn't want things to play out this way, but eventually realizes they have to. So it's interesting to see how it plays out that way, considering that Stan was her abuser and Richard was her lover, but Richard very quickly turns into the ultimate monster because he wants her dead. Dead. So earlier I'd mentioned how toxic masculinity is really highlighted in this movie. It shows there's a lack of trust between the men, a lack of connection between them because of the toxic traits, because Richard is so aggressive at times. The other men feel like they can't trust him, or that he might lose control or lose his temper and take it out on them. So there's this weird dynamic even between the men because of the toxicity, which I thought was also really interesting. The large earrings, I should have said this in my spoiler-free review, but that is a style choice that she makes in a lot of her films, which I really enjoy. That was also something she did in The Substance, which was really cool. One of the main characters in The Substance also had very large earrings, which is really cool. And here you can see them. Very large star earrings. Let's see. I'm almost to the end of this, I think. So there is some silence in some of the scenes, especially in the deaths. So there's a scene where Stan is shot, right? And this movie could have been super hyperbolic with its kills and over the top. Like sometimes in horror movies, you'll see, so Stan was driving when he was killed in this movie. Again, this is a part of the spoiler review. And when Stan is shot, the vehicle could have flipped and fell over the cliff, and it could have been super dramatic and cinematic. But it wasn't. It was very realistic. It just kind of drove over to the side and stopped, and then she pulled him out and got in the truck. So, I liked the silence and the realism to the scenes because it made it feel sadder, which was so much more realistic. Now, in the very end of the movie, Richard and Jen finally confront one another. And I want to talk about that scene explicitly because it was a work of art. So in the very end of the movie, Richard is in the house and he can't get a hold of his buddies. And so he's panicking because he knows that that means his buddies, Dimitri and Stan, are gone. He knows that means Jen has gotten to them and he's next. So he is taking a shower and he's naked. You do see full male nudity in this movie, just a heads up. And he gets out of the shower because I think he hears something or is, I don't remember what it is, but he gets out of the shower and he goes into like the little living area quarters or whatever, and the TV turns on. And when the TV turns on, it is kind of like a TV infomercial sales pitch with these really pretty sexualized women. And I thought that was really a nice touch because this is like the start of Jen showing back up at this house. And this infomercial is infomercial for a transaction, right? You're going to purchase something from this infomercial. And I thought a sales show coming on the TV with pretty girls was very symbolic because it reminded me of his line earlier in the movie where he said if it wasn't for the kids, implying that he would be with Jen or whatever, and that his relationship wasn't transactional. But in the reality, it really was transactional. He only saw her as just like his side girlfriend, basically. But she saw him as something more. And so there was this lie, this expectation that there was more there from her than there was from him. Anyways, thought that was a nice touch. That there was this transactional sales show right when she pops back up. Also, he's walking around the house completely naked. Thought that was a great touch too because he's vulnerable and exposed. And I thought that was nice commentary on how a lot of women feel vulnerable and exposed when they are being objectified by men or when they are being like oogled and looked at by men. I thought that was pretty cool. Also, not a great way to be hunted. Very, very bloody scene. Blood everywhere. Everywhere. It's probably one of the most, I mean, other than maybe like Kill Bill, it's probably one of the most bloodiest scenes I've seen in a long time. When he first sees Jen, it's a beautiful scene because there is this colored glass in the home, and the way it's shot, it's cinematically beautiful because he's on one side of the glass, she's on the other, and it's like colored glass. Very beautiful. His first words to her is, listen, let's, like he wants to talk things out with her, which is funny because I don't think he's just bargaining for his life here. I think he's also trying to talk things out with her and explain that he really does love her and that he isn't just using her because, you know, it's not just a transactional relationship. She's still toting around this massive gun, and she is this tiny little girl. I love that every time she shoots the gun, she gets like a massive kickback. That was great because very realistic. And also her little small figure, it makes her seem like a prey turning into a predator carrying around this big gun. She still looks like a prey, but she is turning into a predator. And yeah, so more blood trails throughout the house. She's following his blood trail throughout the house. She is hunting down a shot animal, which is really nice. The very final scene, he grabs her. He's trying to choke her. His last line in the entire movie, oh, sweet, sweet Richard, your last line is, women always have to put up a fight. Oh, sweet Richard. And then she shoots him and blows him up against a wall, and he dies. And then the TV comes on again, or she walks out into the area with the TV, and the infomercial then says, "It's like a miracle," which I thought was a nice touch and very comical. It's almost like the director saying, "Good riddance." Maybe. I don't know. I just thought it was kind of comical and a nice touch. Because he was a very, very awful person throughout the entire movie. By this point in the movie, her hair is completely black and brown and is drenched. She has burnt this phoenix logo on her from where she was impaled earlier in the movie. I didn't really go into details with that during the spoiler review portion of this, but she has burnt a phoenix emblem on her to cauterize her wound. So she is completely transformed, just like the phoenix. This movie is so interesting, so gross, and so impactful. If you can stomach it, I highly recommend it. If you can watch it twice, I recommend watching it twice. I don't always watch movies twice. I don't always recommend watching movies twice, as you can tell from yesterday's recommendation. But this one is definitely worth 2 watches. So if you get a chance to watch Revenge, and you can stomach it, definitely give it a shot this month. But thanks for being patient with me through this very long review. I promise not all of them will be this long, and not all of them will be so segmented. But I appreciate those of you who stuck in through the whole thing. And for those of you who took a break and then came back, I appreciate you too. Thanks. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.